Thanks, Mike. Now that you talk, I forgot it was being recorded. I should have really thought my background strategy out a wee bit better than I did. So now the recording is going to have this naff Halloween background on it forever. Novel I'll wear off quite quickly. So yeah, my talk today, it's called But We Did User Testing. If you saw me do a talk at IXD a couple of years ago, I'm sorry, but it's the same one. So, you know, apologies in advance. I know at least Lauren, I think you've seen this one before, but I've changed it a little bit. But yeah, it's a talk that I've given before. And first I'll introduce myself, do my little pitch, and then tell you a bit about the talk. So I'm David Hamill, a freelance UX consultant. So I went back to freelance in the beginning of 2019. And previously I was leading UX research at Skyscanner, and I went back to freelance, and now I work with a number of companies. I do UX research for them, but also I give sort of kind of advice on for teams that are already doing UX research. I sort of mentor UXers who are like UX teams of one. So I sort of mentor and advise them on behalf of their employers and stuff like that. I also dish out sort of free advice in 30-minute sessions from my website. So if you want some advice, you can go to my website, which I'll give you the address for at the end, and you can book a wee session if you want me to nosy into what you're doing. So yeah, that's me. So this talk is largely inspired by something that sort of kind of grinds some gears a bit, and the inspiration sort of come from projects that I've seen where where there's been a sort of research team involved. There's been a good budget there for research, but the project itself has dive bombed, and despite that, and the reason it gets at me is that I think that sort of thing has an impact on our discipline, because if you're a software engineer or product manager or whatnot in a project that's had lots of UX research involved in it, and the project dive bombed, then it's very easy to just say, well, that UX research lark's just nonsense. You know, we've tried it before and it didn't work. And literally one of my clients is that's exactly the words that he'd said to me. Oh, we've tried, you know, your user research, but it didn't work. Still a client, I should say. So hopefully I've proved otherwise, at least with that one person. But yeah, so that's the motivation for this. Hopefully more will be revealed. So audience participation is a bit hard on Zoom calls, but I don't know if anybody's aware of this tool from the UK government. I should at this point thank Lauren for pointing this out to me, because it's a way better example than the example that I had in there, and it was her that brought my attention to this. So I know at least Lauren's aware of it. So I know at least one of you. So what it does is it asks you a bunch of questions, and if you've lost your job through COVID, it gives you some suggestions based on the questions that it's answered you, and its sort of recommendations. I'm trying not to be distracted by everybody's dinner. Thankfully, I've had mine already, but I hope it's good, Jamie. Yeah, so you input you answer the questions, and it makes some suggestions. And the team that built it, you know, carried out thorough research. They were so proud of that they even wrote a blog post, sort of detailing all the research that they did. But they then pulled that post, and that's essentially because the tool itself wasn't very well received by the public. I'm not really one to be sharing Daily Mail things. I couldn't find a better example, but don't buy the Daily Mail. It's a hateful rag. It spreads all sorts of discontent in the country. Just, it's a terrible, terrible newspaper, but here we are. So yeah, it was essentially making sort of either ridiculous suggestions to people about what they could be, like a circus performer, or you know, a boxer in this case, or it was just suggesting that people already, you know, you could work in a supermarket, and like, well, yeah, I know that, it's, you know, that's not useful. So it got sort of kind of quite a lot of public ridicule, which essentially led to the chap that wrote the post about how the research taken it down. And you know, if you've got the link to that, you can see in the comments about how his entire portfolio website's been taken down is because he's had some pretty bad sort of comments about that. And I generally will make a point about doing that to people is just bad form. It's like, by all means point out the UX issues and things, but just ripping people's work apart publicly is just bad form in my view. Anyway, I'll get off my pedestal on that one. So the problem with it is that, so they carried out usability testing, they carried out accessibility testing. Is that it was really accessible by a sort of large audience. They'd made it so it was really usable. It just wasn't useful. And so the team did really good work, but they were only in charge of a certain part of the UX research or the UX process. And one part of it that they weren't in charge of is getting to decide whether it existed or not. That was the bit they had no control over. So they basically start from the point of, this thing is going to exist, make it as usable and accessible as possible. And so you can come up with something. Somebody drawing on it. Daniel's iPhone. Okay, Daniel, could you get your iPhone off my slide deck, please? Right. So, yeah. So they didn't have any control over this, and so that's part of that bit is the usability testing is not going to help you with that. And I'll move on to this. Is not sure if we've got that, if the show of hand facilities on is available on Zoom, but like I don't know if some of you will have read this book called Sprint, and if you haven't read it, the spoiler is it's essentially about, you know, designing and testing ideas in 5 days. So on the Monday, you start by sort of mapping out a problem. On Tuesday, you do the sketching. Everybody decides what you're going to do on Wednesday. On Thursday, you make a prototype. And on Friday, you test it. I don't know if anybody's actually been involved in one of these. It never works like that. But there we are. But I think this is part of the issue that we have, is this idea that that a product idea can be kind of created in this way and validated in this way. So they are essentially called GV design sprints. So GV stands for Google Ventures, because it was the team there at Google Ventures that developed it. It was actually developed for Google Ventures to decide whether or not they were actually going to invest in companies or not. So it actually really wasn't developed for this purpose at all, but they don't mention that in the book. So it's got quite a cult following now, like GV design sprints. Some people like attach their entire professional identity to doing design sprints. Some companies, that's all that they do now is design sprints. So and so to the extent where there's a Sprint Stories Medium page where people post up their great stories about how GV sprints have helped them with their validation of product ideas. And in this one here, there's a company in India where the chap's writing about how, like, him and his colleagues got together, you know, did design sprint, and we're able to find out in 5 days that the product idea would fail. So they came up with the idea of doing custom T-shirt designs, and at the end of it, tested it with 5 customers, and then decided that it wasn't a valid product idea. The problem with that is if you search for custom T-shirt designs, you get 800 million results on Google, and the advertising space is booked up, which suggests there's a lot of bidding on that. I guess what I'm getting to is it's already a validated product idea. They didn't need to stick it in front of 5 randomly chosen customers and then make a decision based on that. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that it's a valid but competitive space. So because they asked 5 people whether they liked it or not and decided not, they decided it wasn't. Hopefully, thankfully, these companies here that are probably making a decent living from custom T-shirt designs didn't go through such a process. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. So the 2 parts of the problem really is that usability testing isn't for validation. That's not what it was designed for. And the other thing is that prototypes aren't products. So yeah, those green lines are really distracting me. Anyway, so so I'm not really one for UX diagrams. You know, ones that are like, they look like an overblown sort of jellyfish, and there's like so much stuff in them that you can't understand them. But this is one that I refer to quite a lot when I'm talking to people about so essentially the layers of user experience. It's not mine. I didn't develop it. I found it somewhere and stole it, and now I don't even know who created it, so I can't quote them, I'm afraid. But so you've got, like, you know, the value, the usefulness at the bottom, and then your next layer is its usability, and at the top is delightful. Often I'm using this when I'm talking to people who want to prioritize delight over usable and useful, and I'm trying to explain why that's a bad priority, because we haven't worked on these other things yet. But it works in reverse as well. The thing is with usability testing is that it's for this bit of it. Yeah, it helps you make the thing that you've got more usable. And if your entire product value is around is based on making processes simpler and easier and more usable, then yeah, you can get a lot of information about the value from that. But it's essentially for establishing usability, or in fact improving usability. But without this layer, you don't actually have a product, because you don't have anything that anybody needs or values. So you just create, like we've seen in the example, is a usable, accessible thing that nobody needs. So another rhetorical question for you is, how many participants do you need for a usability study? Now, you're either going to say it depends, 5 to 8, or you've got some sort of other theory on that. And I'm not going to dwell too much on what you think the right answer is, but a common answer is 5 to 8. And this is the chart that is the root of that number, where the argument for 5 to 8 participants comes from, about why it's a sufficient sample size for a usability test. Now, developed by Nielsen Norman Group, and it sort of shows you down the bottom you've got number of test users, and up the top you've got usability problems found. So they say that between 5 and 8, you're going to get somewhere between 80% and 90% of the number of usability tests that you would get if you tested 15. So basically the sort of marginal return on extra participants gets lower and lower. So your time's better off spent testing with just 5 to 8 of those. But this bit's really important in that, is that the justification of it is about usability issues found. It's about the number, finding sufficient issues. That's how you're arguing that with somebody who says, oh, but you've only tested with 5 users. This is why you're pointing out to them that that's actually a decent size sample. So the theory being that if we give 5 users the same task to do, we witness repeated problems, then many of our users are likely to experience those problems also. So we should fix them. Yeah. So usability testing tells you, can people use it, or actually more importantly, what is it that makes it more difficult to use than it could be? But it doesn't tell you, will people use it? You can ask them and they might give you an answer, but that answer's bullshit, frankly. and you shouldn't really listen to it. So usability testing doesn't tend to establish this bit of it, so it shouldn't be used for that. Yeah. So, and when I make this point to people who like using prototype tests to establish the validity or to validate a product idea, I often get this about oh yeah, that's if you're doing usability sessions, but ours are more like concept tests. Yeah, we're testing the concept. That's fair enough, but I'll take you back to sample sizes. Your sample size for a usability test is based on usability problems found. It is not a representation of an entire market. And so just because 5 to 8 people hate your product idea doesn't mean it's not a valid product idea. And likewise, if 5 to 8 people tell you they love it, doesn't mean it's a valid product idea. So you can either use that sample size because you're doing usability testing or not. You can't argue things both ways. And so, this is whenever you're testing a prototype, it's a kind of joke that is it like nobody ever comes out and says, oh my God, I love this. When are you going to build it? Sometimes people ask when you're going to build it. And actually sometimes, very rarely, like actually once in my career, I've seen somebody like really hotly excited about when a prototype was going to be made for real. But that's no way of looking out for people saying that is no way of expecting whether a product's valid or not. So how do you validate a product idea then? And like the uncomfortable answer here is to release it. Until that's why the term MVP exists. Until you're offering something that offers the value of your product and seeing whether people take you up on it, you're not validating anything. That's not to say that testing prototypes with people early on is not a good thing to do. In fact, it is. You can spot things about it that this workflow doesn't work the way that people tend to go about that thing. So we could improve that, and so you can improve these things. But it doesn't mean that when you come to the end of it, that you that you can be sure that it's then a valid product idea, because you can't without the behavioral proof of somebody saying, yes, here's my money, I'll use that, or actual people using stuff. And that's essentially why the Lean Startup book was written. That's pretty much the basis. That's pretty much the basis of it. So, but like the team that in the UK government, I can't remember which department it was, usability testing in a project, usability testing is often the first bit of research that they get to do, because they weren't involved in that discussion about whether the idea was a good thing or not. They're just handed the job of bringing that idea to life. And that's okay when the value's already being established. Like, for example, if you're building a website for custom t-shirt designs, you know that's already that's a valid product idea. Your problem there is going to be competition in the space. So for example, online car insurance quotes. you know, you wouldn't have to go and like validate that idea. You don't have to do generative research to suggest whether people want car quotes online, because it exists. You know, you've got the evidence that you need, and there are viable businesses already using it. So when that's the case, testing prototypes is not the first thing that you should do, because there are examples of it already in existence. So start by testing the things, the fully functioning things that are already out there, rather than a sort of wireframey sort of prototype of what is essentially a copy of something that already exists, with maybe some improved sort of tweaks here and there. Learn from what's already out there and pull all the good bits out and leave all the bad bits, and then make your prototype. So, but that's not to say you don't test prototypes, but to test prototypes to find big issues in your design ideas early. And the reason I say big issues is there'll be a ton of issues that you will not find, because a usability test of a prototype compared to a usability test of a fully functioning product is like night and day difference in terms of the sort of level of engagement that you get, etc., and therefore the level of findings that you're going to get. So you really find out the sort of standout stuff, and sometimes you think, oh, this is great, because you never really saw anything that really stood out as being wrong. But that doesn't mean all right, you should just crack on now and build it. It just means that you didn't. The opportunity wasn't there to find the UX issues at that point, and you know, you'll probably find them at the next point and the next point. The idea is to find the issues before you've invested too much time and effort in it, which is obviously expensive. So it's about, you know, the efficiency, cost efficiency. Yeah, I think I've pretty much just said that. So there we are. And here's an example which is dating rather badly now that Skyscanner's rebranded itself, but this is like a sort of kind of go-to example on a sort of a process that actually would have failed if we'd tried to stick a prototype in front of it in front of people and ask them if they would use it. In fact, when we did stick a prototype of it in front of people, there was a lot of opinion about whether it was the right thing to do or not. Whether a different approach would be, would be better. But thankfully, we just actually, as you're supposed to do, relied on observations about what people could and couldn't do with it. But this is the sort of this is the process when we're at Skyscanner. We went through. Firstly, its genesis was user research, and that's, I guess, this is the key thing, that the key message of the entire talk. Is that the genesis of your product ideas should come from evidence about your users, not the sort of the energy or enthusiasm of a CEO about his idea. So initially it was like so essentially I should explain what this feature does or did. Hopefully it's still live, but if you're flying from an airport like Edinburgh, which doesn't have maybe 7-day coverage of direct flights to a destination, if you choose the wrong dates, often you're led to believe, or if you choose dates where direct flights aren't available, often you're led to believe that the airlines that you know that exist, that fly those routes, aren't covered. Yeah, so people would thought, oh, Skyscanner doesn't have EasyJet, because I know EasyJet fly direct and there's no direct flights here. The problem was that they didn't choose the day where direct flights were, and so then they thought, oh, Skyscanner's rubbish. So we sort of spotted that, and after quite a lot of deliberation, managed to get a sort of size of it. It looked like it was happening about 10% of searches. And then we tested a prototype solution of it. Refined the designs based on what we found, tested it again for improvements. Then we built a working version of it, tested again, found more things that that needed to be found. Back to my point about prototypes, and then it was released as an experiment to see if it actually had the if it had the sort of the benefits that we thought it was going to have. And it was only after all that it was then released live. Validation of it happened at point 8. Yeah, it didn't happen at point 2. Yeah, but there's high confidence that comes from step 1, but it was never validated. And so the idea of validation comes from the idea of certainty, that everybody wants certainty, and it's foolish to think you never have certainty. All you have is confidence and levels of risk. And really your user research is about giving you more confidence and reducing risk. So countless other ideas have died painful death when the user's not put at the center. So where do these other product ideas often come from? I can only talk in my own experience here, but here's a few ideas. Like, we want to sell more stuff, so let's add this new thing to the product. Funnily enough, this new thing dies because nobody really wanted it. We want users to log in, so let's build something they'll need to log into. Not a great way to start a product idea off. Or we want to build, this is one of my favorites, we want to build something in this new technology. When you work in tech companies, this is quite a strong force for building stuff, is the desire for somebody to work, or a team of people to build a chatbot, for example. Notice how most chatbots are either shit or no longer in use because they were shit. So that's another sort of motivation. And one thing that's, you know, how they all started with "we want," because it was I mean, even at a sort of project sort of brief, that "we want" this would probably be reworded round about some sort of unbelievable use case in which this was in fact in the user's best interest. But everybody knew that the prime motivation was of a business goal, rather than having a user's goal that had a business goal that could benefit from it. So essentially what I'm saying is, you know, I'm preaching to the converted here. I should really preach to product managers on this one, but it's to start with the user. And unfortunately, saying start with the users, like in my experience, I find a bit icky now, because I've just worked like with a lot of people that say it a lot as a throwaway comment, and they don't even do it. They just, it's a nice sound bite that makes you sound like a design leader. But there we are. So in my view, successful innovations come in two sort of forms from a UX point of view. There's sort of two ways that they go about it. One is they complement current behavior. They just slip right in. And so there's no sort of worry about adoption or anything like that, because the user doesn't have to need to do anything to adopt it. It just comes into their life, and then their life's improved. And other ones are valuable enough to promote a change of behavior. The example I tend to use with these two ones is like comparing contactless payment cards not being number 1 and Apple Pay being number 2. Is that one is, when your card gets updated, you're just sent one that's got contactless on it. It's got a wee logo on it. And then when you got to the end of the supermarket queue in Tesco, you saw the wee thingy in it. Oh, I can just pay like that. They didn't have to fill out forms. Didn't have to like change any account with anything. They didn't have to do anything themselves. Really, the jump that they needed to make was to go their card. Whereas with Apple Pay, you've got to sort of want a better life. You know, you've got to, I've got to stick my card on here, and it's not like the way that people like did it before. And neither of those things are any better or worse than each other. I've got a preference for number 1, though. In my own work, I like working on projects that are number 1. But for it to be successful, if it's number 2, is that the user has to value it enough. And often that the case is that the innovation doesn't fall into the current behavior, so it's going to require a change from the user. And the problem is the user doesn't actually value the thing, so they're just not going to adopt it. So a couple of examples. I couldn't do a sort of UX presentation without this pave the walkway sort of example. But yeah, on the left here, we've got a college who basically, rather than, you know, try and build paths where people, where they wanted people to walk, they saw where people walked and put the paths there. And that's what I mean. There's no new behavior that needs to happen. There's suddenly just a path under the feet of the route that you were taking. This one on the right is from the Netherlands, is where that light there represents whether you can cross or not. And the reason it's there is because so many people are standing at the side of the road looking at their phones. So it's rather than say, hey, you look up, get away from your phone. There's a light up there. Is actually, oh, you're looking down there. Okay, we'll put the light down there then. And that's a sort of example of what I mean by the sort of innovation number one. And like, so innovation, I mean, Apple Pay being an example of innovation number two. There are lots of those. But I sort of recommend this. This is like, there are a small number of UX sort of blog posts that I share a disproportionate amount of time, and this is one I share lots. If you just Google intent to solve Laura Klein, you'll find it. Laura Klein writes immensely brilliantly, by the way. It's almost like somebody's writing from my thoughts, because she just calls things out as bullshit when they're bullshit and stuff like that. A really entertaining way of writing. But she actually explains that what a gap in user needs actually looks like, while compared to what people think it is, because often people do user research and they see that something could be done another a better way, and then they call that a gap in user needs, even though the users are all happy with their imperfect hack. So if you look out for people who've got a problem that they take action to try and solve, then you've got a stronger sort of signal of a gap in user needs, because people are feeling the pain of it enough to try and solve it. So give that a read. It's cracking. And so essentially to sum up, again, sort of preaching to the converted, I feel a little bit, is that like when we're not putting users at the center of the product idea before we have it, we're essentially just throwing shit at walls. And this idea of validating ideas as the first bit of research is hit and miss, because it doesn't start from a point of understanding users, the way that they work, their workflows, what they value, you know, ad infinitum, the list of things that it doesn't take into account of. And yeah, so that's that, and thanks. Any questions? So my website's upux.biz, biz. If I said I would share that, I can't remember why now.